Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, who is an advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, joining us to give us an overview of the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to do so using the Q&A box or the chat function located in your browser. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Akhnaf, and good evening from Israel. I've said it many times. A week is a very long time in Israeli politics, and it's a very long time in the Middle East. For many years, people talked about the slow shifting sands in the Middle East. So the last year and a half, 2 years has been significant. A week ago, we were talking about some sort of negotiations towards deconfliction, perhaps even normalization with Syria. Certainly the talks were ongoing and they were very relatively high levels and certainly direct. But now, a week later, Israel today bombed significant symbols of the new Syrian regime under President Giuliani. And the question is, how do we get there? How do we get where we are currently? Well, since Giuliani took over, certainly it was an improvement for Israel's geostrategic position. It was certainly important and certainly improvement to have a new leader as opposed to Assad, because of the role Assad played in ensuring that Hezbollah got weapons from Iran and supplies and resources and funding, etc., etc. So the fact that an arch opponent of Iran is now ruling Syria is certainly an improvement on a geostrategic level. Now that Hezbollah have certainly been weakened in Lebanon, obviously that's taken a little bit of the shine off it, but still it's still significant. But there was always a little bit of discomfort in Israel. Giuliani's background, working and being part of banned, prescribed organizations internationally associated with ISIS or Al-Qaeda, a very extreme background. It was something that Israel was always a little bit cautious of, and it certainly relayed these cautions to its American colleagues and even Europeans. But to a large extent, especially over the last few weeks, it's allowed Giuliani's Western charm offensive to stand. And we know that he met with President Trump. We know that sanctions have been relieved on Syria, or they're going to be. Recognition of this new government, etc., etc. But there was always some significant concerns within the Israeli government. We saw, 4 or 5 months ago, where the Alawites and certain Christian populations in Syria were attacked by either regime forces or by militias close to the regime. We've seen this sort of play out in many other parts of the Middle East, where proxies and militias are created basically to do the dirty work of certain powers, where they can sort of wash their hands with it. And we saw massacres, we saw attacks on minorities, whether it's the Alawites or Christians. And Israel certainly relayed its concerns then and tried to make its case to the international community that maybe we should just hold off a little bit. Let's just wait and see if what Giuliani says for outside audiences and his nice suits and his nice smiles are really what's happening within Syria itself. What happened a couple of days ago, for Israel at least, was a red line. The Druze area in southwest of the country, not too far from the Israeli border, was attacked by militias again, loyal to the government. There was no doubt about that. They attacked Druze civilians. They've killed many. It depends who you believe and how many were killed, but it's clear that many civilians were killed. We've seen these harrowing visuals of Druze with their moustaches snipped or trimmed or cut by Islamist militias. And anyone who knows the Jews' religion and the Jews' tradition, the mustache is extremely important, and that was well known by those who trimmed them. But it was just a way to humiliate them. We have heard of houses being looted, burnt, children being attacked, etc., etc. For Israel, this was a red line for a number of reasons. First of all, because it's ever so close to the Israeli border. Israel is quite happy that the government and its militia stay away. So what happened is when the Jews attacked back, then Julani claimed what needs government intervention, and that sent in the army. Now, there'd been an understanding with Israel that the Syrian army doesn't get too close to where Israel is holding on the Golan Heights, and even a little bit into eastern Syria, or western Syria, I should say. So there is a feeling by many that this was just a big ploy to send in the militias. Then it creates a sort of conflict, and then they can come in and say, look, we're only here to end the conflict, to keep the peace, and Israel wasn't buying any of it. So Israel decided to attack, as I said, first of all, because geographically it's much closer to Israel and where Israeli forces are, but also, just as importantly, is the relationship between the Jews and the State of Israel. For those who don't know, the Jews they've been described in many international media as an Arab group, but if you ask the average Jews if they're Arab, they certainly wouldn't consider themselves. They are an offshoot of a Shiite Islamic sect, but we're talking about almost a millennium ago. They are certainly very distinct traditionally, religiously, etc. And in Israel proper, they are very loyal. They serve in the army. They're considered really brothers in arms. On the Golan, when Israel conquered it in 1967, it took over that territory, which had a lot of Jews there. Those Jews considered themselves for many years, if not many decades, Syrians. They didn't take Israeli citizenship even when it was offered, and they had a sort of arm's length relationship to the state. Since the Syrian civil war with the bloodshed and the massacres there, I think a lot of them were quite glad that they were on the Israeli side and came a lot closer to Israel. Since the attacks on Jews on their brethren, and let's not forget sometimes these are very close ties, because some clans were cut in half in 1967, so they have very, very close ties still to this day. When they saw that their brethren were attacked, they were outraged, they demonstrated, even rioted, and they demanded action. The Israeli government did act. It has bombed certain militias and Syrian military targets, and today even targeted Damascus itself, targeting, amongst others, the Army Chief of Staff Center. And that was really a strong message by Israel that we can go wherever we want to. This is, the height of the pinnacle of the Syrian military, and even here we can do what we want. But it's really an important message. It's a message of solidarity, but it's also a strategic necessity for Israel to send a message to Julani that it's unacceptable. You do not start up with the Jews. You don't start up with our brothers in Israel, and you certainly don't move your forces closer to our forces after what's happened. It's in Julani's interest at this point to deconflict as soon as possible. Messages have been passed back and forth through the White House. The US administration wants this round over as soon as possible. Earlier in the day, Israeli military figures said that this could take days, but it does seem like it's probably going to be over within hours, because the White House is very insistent that this ends. They have an interest in Julani ruling, but they also have an interest in him not going too far and Israel backing off. So there's probably going to be an understanding where Julani removes his forces from key Jewish points, and Israel will stop its attacks. But it certainly will leave a bitter taste in probably both sides' mouths, and it will take some will to get back to the table for both sides. It probably will happen because there's an interest on both sides that this deconfliction happen sooner rather than later to ensure these types of things don't happen. But Israel has certainly, again, shown through its strength, through its ability to target its enemies wherever it is, that it is able and willing to take these steps. So I think this could be over just as soon as it started, but it certainly sends a very strong message to Giuliani at this point that there are red lines and Israel will keep to them. The other major issue that seems to be developing at the moment is the possibility, once again, of forward movement on the hostage deal with Hamas. These are indirect talks that have been back and forth, optimism, then pessimism. It seems now that there's another step forward. For days, Israel's been going back and forth with the maps of where it's going to retreat to if there should be this interim deal. Israel, to my understanding, has already presented 3 or 4 different maps, each one going further and further back. The key for Israel was the so-called Morag corridor, which would basically go just above Rafah. They wanted that to ensure that these militias that Israel's working with, they can create these humanitarian areas where Gazans will be free of Hamas. They'll get everything they need, humanitarian, education, etc. But it does seem, again, from reports, that Israel might have relented on this particular key issue. There are other issues, and it certainly won't be solved from today to tomorrow, but there is, once again, optimism that an interim hostage deal could take place soon, again along the lines more or less of the Witkoff deal. Half of all hostages alive and dead during this deal, discussions on how the war ends, 60 days, release of Palestinian terrorists, humanitarian, a massive surge of humanitarian food aid, etc., etc. But it does seem, again, there's optimism. Again, tomorrow there could be pessimism. But at the moment, Israel seems to be very keen at this point to get this over the line, probably partially because of the Trump administration's insistence that this should happen, even though Israel is denying that. But it does seem that there is, once again, momentum, with much of it coming from the Israeli side. Internal politics, again, never a dull moment. Remarkably, in just 24 hours, the Israeli government is down to its bare bones. We saw yesterday, after many, many, many threats, the United Torah Judaism, the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox party, removed itself, resigned from the government and the coalition, which put it down to 61, if you include Avi Maoz. If you don't, then it's 60. This is a one-person party. He's a bit of a rogue actor, does whatever he wants. So, you can call it a 61 or a 60. It is significant because 61 is a majority and 60 isn't. But it certainly doesn't give Bibi an easy time even then. Now we have Shas, who came out with their own decision. They've been back and forth about it. Aryeh Deri is a lot closer to Netanyahu. He knows he has a different electorate, as we've talked about. Most of his voters are not ultra-Orthodox. They are people who serve in the army, who work, who are not necessarily exceedingly happy with the stance on the refusal of enlistment law. But also they are right-wing, and they don't want to have their party, or the party they voted for last time, bring down the right-wing government. So Shas came up with quite a unique idea. They said that they're leaving the government, but not the coalition. Now, for those who think that might be a bit strange, what they mean is that they're going to leave all their government positions, but they'll still remain in the coalition in the Knesset, for what that's worth, even though they are not really voting on the government at this point. But it's a play. It's a way of having your cake and eat it. It's a way of ensuring that Netanyahu still retains his 60 or 61 rather than become an officially minority government. On top of that, you have Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the two right-wing national religious parties, who are basically also extremely unhappy with Netanyahu because of the negotiations for this deal with Hamas. They've already said that they no longer see themselves beholden to the government, so they're voting as they want. and even suggested at one point that they may vote for opposition bills if they meet their ideological level. So what we have tonight, probably, is a government with pretty much just Likud. It can no longer rely on any of its partners for any votes, and the Knesset still has another couple of weeks of session. This isn't going to worry Netanyahu too much. It's certainly of concern, but it doesn't mean that this government is about to collapse. Over the next couple of weeks, it simply won't be able to pass any laws. But then you have the summer session, which then goes into the Jewish high holidays. So Netanyahu probably, unless something dramatic happens, probably still will remain prime minister without elections for another few months. What happens after the high holidays is anybody's guess. If they could try and find some resolution to the enlistment issue, perhaps might live to see another day. If the deal, there doesn't become a final deal, a final ceasefire with Hamas, and Hamas still retains some power, and it's certainly not good enough for Smotrich and Ben Gvir, then we may even see the government fall before that. The fact is, everybody knows that the election campaigns have started, if not in name, certainly in essence, and everybody's jockeying to make sure that their issue is front and center, the one that they can go back to their electorate when elections are called, whether they're at the end of this year or early next year, and say, this is our issue, we stood strong, and we're the ones that you should vote for next time. Election poll came out tonight, the first one since all these political machinations, and remarkably, the story of the polls tonight is Benny Gantz, who at one point was, I think, even polling at one point better than Netanyahu, doesn't even cross the threshold. Gadi Eisenkot is number 2, left the party. He's clearly taken a lot of the voters with him. But when Naftali Bennett is in the race and everybody else, Benny Gantz, the man who I think at one point was polling in the mid to late 20s, as I said, over Likud, who was seen as potentially the next prime minister, at this point, according to polls, doesn't even cross the threshold. So again, shows the fickle nature of Israeli politics. Again, these are polls, these are not elections, but it's still a very important guide to sentiment in Israel, and it's a major fall from grace from the man that many thought could possibly be the next prime minister. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Now, I will start with a question here from Jay Lewis, who asks, I was on a Regavim webinar today, and they said there were riots by the Druze in the north that went unaddressed by the Israeli police. Is that correct?
I mean, it depends what you call unaddressed. There are a lot of Druze areas, and it only takes a few people to riot or demonstrate. The police are all over the place. In fact, for the first time, I think, the Israeli police went into Syria because the biggest, if you want to call it, riot happened at the border, Majd al-Shams, and basically right on the border with Syria. They knocked down or cut through certain parts of the border with Syria, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of Israeli Druze or Druze who live in Israeli territory who basically crossed into Syria to go and help their brethren. There was a call from Syrian Druze to go help them, and then the Israeli Druze also helped them, and one of the spiritual leaders called on their people in Israel to cross the border, and there were quite a few. Israeli army, as you can imagine, is extremely stretched, and there's even talk of bringing one of the brigades up from Gaza to man the border, because it obviously is a very difficult situation. You have Israeli citizens who are now in an enemy country, going to fight potentially a foreign army, or an army in a foreign state, in an enemy state. Israel doesn't want that to happen. If anyone's fighting, it's going to be the Israeli army. It's not individual citizens, civilians. So they're sent in the police. They've sent in the army to try and bring back as many as possible. They brought back quite a few, but many they haven't been able to. And reports are that they are in the heart of action. So this is a really tense diplomatic situation. So the Israeli police are stretched. The Israeli army is stretched. It's very difficult. On the whole, the Druze within Israel, they're very peaceful. They're very loyal. They're very Zionist. They are certainly in pain over what they're seeing in their co-religionists just over the border. And a lot of Israelis understand that pain. They fight alongside them, they work alongside them, etc., etc. So there have been very problematic elements, but certainly the most problematic one is when you have, your civilians, your citizens cross over into an enemy state to fight basically what is an enemy army. So it's a very tense situation, and it's one that Israeli leaders are really concerned about, and they're trying as much as possible to bring them home. We saw an amazing thing that two Jews members of Knesset crossed the border into Syria. Again, this is unprecedented, to try and convince members of their community to return to Israel, promising them that Israel will do everything possible to defend their brethren. So we're really seeing unprecedented things at the moment in the north of the country.
Wow. Thank you. Now, I am going to a question from David Levine, who asks, 2 weeks after the U.S. use of bunker buster bombs, does Israel have a better idea of the actual amount of damage done to Iran's nuclear program?
Well, when you say Israel, I can't talk for Israel. I certainly can't talk for the intelligence, but we do. What's been leaked, as much as we can see, is that there is a high level of confidence that a lot of damage was done, that this missing uranium probably was in one of these sites when it was bombed, which would be certainly good news. But again, it doesn't mean it's completely destroyed. But I think I suggested this even a couple of weeks ago. The more time that goes on, the more confidence that there is that the nuclear weapons program has been pushed back substantially. Again, hasn't been destroyed. It cannot be fully destroyed. Israel is hoping that Iran will come to its senses, come to the table, negotiate a deal. Let's not forget that there's going to be snapback sanctions by the Europeans in the coming weeks even, I think it is. And that's something which really, really concerns the Iranians, because it will cripple the Iranian economy. They won't be able to sell gas and everything else that they rely on for their economy. So there really is massive, maximal pressure put on the Iranian regime at this point to get back to the table, to try and find some agreement. But at the moment, the Iranians don't seem to be budging. They're not talking to the IEA. They're refusing American outreach. They're bashing the Europeans. So it's not a good place, but hopefully they'll come to their senses and come back to the table.
Okay, thank you. Now, with Israel and Syria clashing over the Druze question, what is the likelihood now, if ever there was one, of Syria signing on to the Abraham Accords?
I don't think there was any imminent likelihood that they'll sign on to the Abraham Accords. I think perhaps it could happen after the Saudis sign on, but again, that's not imminent either. It would have to be an end to the war in Gaza and some sort of, as someone put it today, you'd have to see the Gaza and Palestinian issue in the rearview mirror. They understand that their populations are not happy with what they're seeing on Al Jazeera and all the other propaganda channels. The Saudis are cognizant of that, even though they have no great love for the Palestinians. So there probably would have to be led a new process would probably be led by Saudi Arabia. After that, it's possible that Lebanon and Syria could join, but it's certainly not imminent. And probably at the best that Israel can hope for in the coming weeks and months is probably a deconfliction, an end to hostilities between Israel and Syria. That's what they were negotiating. That's what the expectation was. But obviously the events of the last day or so have certainly put that back. But probably my assumption is, because it's still of the interest of both parties to get back to that at some point and work towards that, that will happen at some point. But that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to join the Abraham Accords just yet.
All right, thank you. Barak Korkmaz asks, so is the current Syrian regime okay for Israel as long as they stay away from Israeli border, or are Druze and Kurdish communities a red line for Israel?
Well, I think Israel has shown in the past also that Kurds are a certain extent a red line. It's a different situation, especially with the the Turkish element involved. The Syrian government is not okay with Israel. Again, it's the better of the two options. As I said earlier, it's preferable to the Assad regime. And it all depends exactly where Giuliani is going. Is Giuliani really going to be that new age, quote unquote, Islamist with a smile leader where, yes, the Islam will be very central to the way he runs his state, but, minorities won't be targeted. They'll have an outward face to the world. Then I think Israel can live with that. If it's just going to be that charm offensive, it's going to be that terrorist in a suit, it's going to be that leader that talks very nicely in Western, parliaments and then goes and kills minority groups and enforces Sharia law on large segments of the population, then that's more problematic. Israel at this point is certainly towards it. I wouldn't say it's towards the latter, but it's certainly more circumspect, more concerned than most European and Western leaders at this point. So I wouldn't say Israel is okay with Giuliani. Certainly it's not okay with Giuliani. Israel would prefer a thriving liberal democracy on its doorstep. It doesn't enjoy the title of being the only liberal democracy in the Middle East. It would love to have multiple liberal democracies in Lebanon, in Syria and elsewhere. But at the end of the day, you have to work with what you've got. So the jury's still out on that. Israel is certainly circumspect. There was even remarkably a call by an Israeli government minister to target Giuliani himself, but I don't think that was coordinated with the government. That's certainly not the government's position. It still wants this deconfliction. It would hope that Giuliani goes beyond the charm offensive and really implements policies to ensure that Syria is not just not a threat to Israel, but even to its own people.
All right, thank you. Now, I'm going to a question here from Lisa Bernard, who asks, how worrisome to Israel is Putin carrying favor with Libya and his eye on a port and presence more generally?
Well, it really goes back to what we were just talking about. Putin had one of his main ports in the Mediterranean in Syria, and he's lost that thanks to the fall of Assad. So he's definitely looking for others. The Mediterranean is a very important cold water port, and Libya is an obvious choice. So certainly it's of great concern to Israel, and it's of great concern to the West in general. Libya is a bit of a mess, so there are different rules for it at the moment. But it's still in Israel's neighborhood, so it would certainly be of concern, but probably more than it's a concern to Israel, it's a concern to the West, because Putin is not necessarily an adversary or an enemy of Israel, but certainly many in the West see him as that. So I think what happens with Putin in the Mediterranean and the potential of him moving his fleet elsewhere is probably more of a concern for the Europeans than it is to Israel at this point.
All right, thank you very much. We're getting close to the end here, but I've got one more audience question here. Can you speak about France's recent decision when they announced that they would allow refugees and migrants from Gaza into France?
Well, yeah, it was a High Court or Supreme Court or some decision of the judicial system that recognized people of Gaza that could potentially gain asylum. On the one hand, it's problematic because the ruling pointed to all Gazans, all Palestinians being under threat from Israel, which goes into that narrative that Israel's, just blindly and willfully killing civilians. On the other hand, perhaps it gives an opportunity, some on the right have claimed, that here is the opportunity for Gazans, for quite a number of months since this idea of giving Gazans the potential to leave the Strip, voluntary relocation. The major problem was, where would they go? Well, now, if France is opening its doors, some on the right have claimed maybe here already is partially an answer. So For many in Israel, it's a double-edged sword that it bashes, this ruling attacks Israel and makes claims that simply Israel would say don't exist. But on the other hand, perhaps there's a positive side, again, those on the right who welcome the prospect of voluntary relocation from some Gazans to at least have a destination where they would be welcomed if they were allowed to leave the Strip.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We've unfortunately reached the end of our podcast for the week. I want to thank you again, Ashley, for taking the time to update us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Now, for our viewers and listeners, please join us on Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for a podcast episode with Josh Hammer, who will be discussing his latest book, Israel and Civilization, and he will also be commenting on his recent debate with Dave Smith that happened over the weekend. As always, I thank you all again for joining us, for your support, for your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.